Good evening. A warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Children, Families and Education Select Committee. My name is Councillor Heena Makwana and I'm the chair of this committee. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. Please note that members of the committee may be using tablets or laptops to view the agenda. We are not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those in the room, please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts, and when you are invited to speak, please ensure you turn your microphones on so that you can be heard in the recording. For those watching via YouTube, if you're so minded, you can complete one of our resident feedback forms. These can be found in the information section underneath the YouTube video. These forms are intended to help us improve the way that we run our meetings. Before we go through our agenda, I'd like to introduce colleagues in the room. So to my right, I have Councillors Smallwood and Batt. To my left is Ryan Dell, Dem Services Officer, along with Naveed Ali, Dem Services Apprentice, Councillors Sweeting, Judge and Gill, Mr Tony Little, our co-opted member, and officers joining us this evening are Abby Preston, Nav Minas, Gary Binstead and Michael Hawkins. So welcome to you all. Thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Ryan.
So we've got apologies from Councillor Heger.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting. Are there any? No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 4th of February. Oh, can we agree the minutes? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 4, to confirm that the items of business marked in part 1 will be considered in public and the items marked as part 2 will be considered in private. There are no part 2 items, so we go straight to item 5, which is a school organisation plan, including school places planning update. Nav, is it you? Thank you, Nav. If you can just get maybe just some key highlights and we can go straight to questions, or if you're happy to, we can go straight to questions. What would you prefer? Go straight to questions. Thank you. Questions. Who'd like to kick us off? Thank you, Councillor Sweeting.
We have reductions in our projections from the last school organisation plan, quite significant reductions. Is there a reason for this? Is it because of our birth rate being on level, or is it because of our methodology for projections? Are we relying on GLA projections, or are we undertaking our own? So some issues about the projections being, quite a lot different, especially in the primary range. Thank you.
Thank you. The projections, we do use various formula that comes through through from the GLA, and we officers in the data team will pick the preferred formula for that year. So we do review it on an annual basis. Our projections have been quite accurate over the years. There's been a difference of just over 1% for the whole school. So year on year we will look at what we projected the previous year and how accurate we have been. So we're very confident on that. There has been a slight change in the birth rate, and I think you can see in the figures for the nursery there has been a change, and that will have an impact on the projections. So we're quite confident with the projections that our data team have been sharing with us. It's just that we have to take into account migration and the changes in the demographic within the local authority. Thank you.
We have a situation where we are undertaking the planning of secondary places, the methodology for secondary places, using the 2 education planning areas. Has this had unintentional repercussions? Because what we have are fewer now, 67% getting first preferences in secondary. We've also got a lot of mismatch between the children going north to the secondary schools and also going out borough. 28% going north, 7 or 8 forms of entry going south. And we've also got possibly the unintended circumstances of children spending a lot more time actually getting to school. Some children in the south offering those unfilled places in the north. So have we got those unforeseen circumstances, because even the Fair Access Panel is accommodating, 93% of the children going to that are in the south, and most of them being secondary age. So have we got the methodology askew? Because there used to be 3 education planning areas for the planning of secondary places.
Thank you. We did go back, and we have discussed about going back to 3 planning areas previously, and I think that's been brought up. Sorry, is that better? Okay, thank you. We have discussed 3 planning areas, so going back to that way of working, and it's remained at 2. What we are finding now is that we've passed our peak for our Year 7s, and I know we will be coming at the total number for our pupils on roll in September 26, so we will be past that peak, and you're talking about surplus places, and we will start to see that at that point. In the meantime, obviously we didn't get the free school, Bishop Arden, online as it was meant to be, and in the interim we've had to request bulge classes over the last 5 to 6 years, and that has been able to accommodate children north and south of Borough. We won't need that going forward after this year, so we are confident on being able to place children.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Sweeting, because I know that you've got another question, it feels like. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to lead on a little bit from what Councillor Sweeting has described. I just wanted to understand, when we get to the secondary school places, we're almost on this like bizarre curve, right, where we're actually going to potentially see the problem we have in primary at the moment go into secondary. How are we? But obviously you can predict that happening, because the kids will grow up. How are we going to support our second? Given that we've got lots of notice, whereas sometimes you can't necessarily predict when people are going to have babies. How are we going to do that on the secondary side? What are we doing with our secondary providers? Is there going to be a need to reduce PANs, places? Because we've obviously got this bulge problem at the moment, but is there going to be a massive problem with a lack of space in the near future? Well, not near future, but 5 years down the line.
Thank you. Well, this document absolutely helps the conversations that we're having with our primary and our secondary leads. And going forward, we will be having those conversations, and PAN reductions are a part of that, because what we don't want to do is have our colleagues in financial difficulties. So by helping support that, and monitoring on a term-by-term basis where there are concerns, we can ask our education advisors to go out and support head teachers in planning for their, for the issues that they have within their school. Obviously, parental preference is key here, and that can change, depending on location, depending on Ofsted grading, and we can't predict that, I'm afraid. So we have to have those regular conversations, and which we are doing. So we're hoping to support in that way.
Thank you, Chair. The second supplementary is around the retention of teachers and the quality of teachers, and any places where we may have people being taught by people that aren't teachers, and I mean, as in they're not fully qualified. Is the teaching? Do we feel that we've got a strong teaching provision across the borough? Do we feel that we're filling the vacancies with appropriate people? Is Hillingdon an attractive place for teachers to come and teach?
Is Hillingdon an attractive place for teachers to come and teach? Question posed by a number of head teachers recently to us. It's a really competitive market, and if you live in some parts of the borough, you're just a few minutes from Ealing, and of course they're inner London waiting, so that competition. Currently, we don't have an issue. So where there are some vacancies, eventually they are staffed by fully qualified teachers. There's a healthy initial teacher training programme that leads to early career teaching. that leads to people staying in some of the schools. Some of the schools are much more proactive about that. Many are recruiting from overseas. So we don't see a picture of unqualified teachers standing in front of classes at this time. But yeah, one of the challenges and one of the questions we've been asked is how can we make Hillingdon an attractive place to come, bearing in mind it's an outer London weighting and a disparity, and it's a very competitive market.
Mr. Little.
Thank you. We've had a problem of providing enough places within the borough for special needs. Do we see that as a problem that is now fully resolved? Will it be resolved in 1 year's time, 2 years' time? Or will it be a permanent problem?
Thank you for your question. It's a very good question. It's difficult to give a concrete answer. What we know is that currently our number of special school places exceeds that of national. So we do have a good supply of special needs school places. I think what we're seeing is a shift in the system which is a national sort of push around more children with EHCPs accessing mainstream where it's possible, and therefore the special schools being for the most complex needs. So currently we've been doing a lot of work around our banding and identifying different needs, and then we're going to create admissions guidance to support that. I think where we haven't had some of that structure, we might have quite a range of different needs in special, and I think moving forward, I think we're always going to have to monitor it closely, and we know that the complexity of needs is increasing in general. But we do have above national places. We have a new free special school that should be coming online, we hope, in the next few years. We're waiting for an update from the DFE. We're also creating more places around SRPs and DUs. So one of the points in response to Councillor Smallwood with the secondary schools is our next project is to look at SRPs and DUs in secondaries, because we need to make sure they at least match the number in primary so we have a clear pathway for them. So I think that's certainly a key priority for us that we're working on at the moment. I don't think at this stage that we need more special school places, but we do have a mix of children both in mainstream who could probably benefit from special, and children in special who could potentially benefit in mainstream. So I think with all of our updated banding framework, it has a much bigger purpose than just a funding framework. It's about really being able to identify needs and see those coming through the system and make sure we've got sufficient places to meet those needs. So I think for now we're where we need to be, but we need to keep a close eye on it.
In terms of this rebanding project, what's the timescale for it?
So we've been working on it for the last 18 months. We've had a specialist send consultant so that she's external and not from the team, leading on this piece of work. She's done it in a number of areas, and it's been fully in partnership with school leaders. So they have collectively created the descriptors based on the needs that we see across Hillingdon schools. So the mainstream banding framework was completed and implemented in September. The special school one has just been completed and is about to be implemented from 1st of April. I must say with the mainstream one, it's going to be implemented over 2 years, but with the special schools, it's going to be implemented all in one go, although we have to take into consideration that some of our schools will see a significant loss in funding, so we're putting in place transitional arrangements. But what that means is that we have a really clear view on the needs that we have in our systems, in our different schools, both mainstream and special. So that will help us a lot more in being able to see further into the future what will we need coming up from primary into secondary and so on. So essentially we've completed the piece of work. We've just got an implementation stage for mainstream in particular.
Councillor Batt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It's very detailed. I just wanted to ask, at the back of talking about increasing competition across London boroughs, I wanted to speak about performance monitoring and accountability. I'm just wondering how the success of the school placement sort of strategy is evaluated. Sort of what key performance indicators are used to monitor the effectiveness of school placements, and how do we engage with stakeholders in that process?
I'll answer for now. I'll answer for now, and if anyone wants to come in, please do. Apologies, I'm losing my voice a bit, so apologies for that. I think for us, having this school organisation plan has been a really positive step forward. We haven't had this sort of clear way of being able to show the different numbers coming through. Did you mean in response to the school organisation? Yeah. So I think it's just being able to monitor closely those numbers, making sure we've got sufficient places. We always aim for that sort of 5 to 8% vacancy level to allow for different movement coming in and out of the borough. But for us, it's just about making sure we have sufficient places, not too many, so that schools then are vulnerable financially in managing those classes if they're undersubscribed for any reason, and making sure it's really user-friendly for our schools predominantly. I think it's something that parents can also look at and understand trends with as well. But the main purpose, I think, strategically is around the local authority working with schools to ensure we have those sufficient places.
Councillor Sweeting.
I'm not asking a question on this, but I don't believe the problem will go away, even though the numbers are falling, because you have got the capacity in the southern wards being urban rather than suburban, and you've got the turbulence in tenure of housing. But that's only my comment rather than a question. I would like to ask whether we can still have a map showing where our year 7s are going. We used to have a map of the borough which showed quite snugly, particular secondary schools and how they were accommodating their locals. And this really shows very clearly, I think, I will use the word turbulence there is in the southern areas, with not only going out this way, so it would be really useful to have that information. But my question is specifically about send children. Is there a policy of when you have got parents requiring a school place for a child that's got either SEN or SEND, directing them more specifically to schools that have more an inclusive way of dealing with SEND? Because that's the message I am getting from some of my schools.
Thank you, Councillor Sweeting. I would say our approach is the opposite of that. What we're trying to really do, and I know we sort of talked about this with the SEND strategy update, and this forms a key part of our strategy, is that we want all of our schools to be inclusive. And we do see, we have those schools that are sort of SEND hotspots that attract lots of families because they've got great practice and everyone's aware of what they're doing. What we're really trying to do is move away from that, so that, because it's a lot of pressure for those schools, and get to a place where any of our schools can accept children with the same needs. So that's a journey, and that's something nationally, but we're certainly not directing them towards inclusive schools. We actually have a policy within our strategy, or an approach, whereby we look to consult with the nearest mainstream school that has the capacity and resources, i.e. the lower levels of EHCP numbers, percentage-wise. So that's going to be a journey for us to get there, and we need to support our schools. But that was part of the thinking behind creating things like the EHCP Plus team, which is a very small team to support complex needs in mainstream. And we also have the pilot project with the Centre for ADHD and Autism, where we've got a youth worker in 4 of our secondary schools to support inclusion and that transition, because we know that that's one of our areas where a lot of placements can break down. So long term, I'd really like to see that pilot project potentially turn into something that we can offer to all of our secondary schools, because we certainly see that difference between primary and secondary, and the difference in learning levels are so dramatic. So there's a lot of work going on with that.
Well, my follow-up question was about secondaries and the update on page 42 of the report says about the need to put more SRPs in secondaries. How are we with that? And I'm not right in thinking that when the new Ruislip High School was built, there was supposed to be that sort of facility in that school. Yes,
thank you. So we've been working closely with our secondaries, and we've been sharing information with them. They're well aware that this is something that we need to do, because we see that difference now with all the primary projects, that we don't have the same number of places in secondary. So the team are currently talking with a number of secondary schools that are interested, which is really positive, so we'll be working closely with them. Ricep High, I know that was before my time, but for whatever reason it was decided not to go ahead with that, so I can't comment much further on that, I'm afraid.
All right, thank you. Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple, one observation and one question, I think. One was with the free school. Have we got the site for the free school now to be built? Was it on page 46? And the second one was more on the recruitment side of it. I do agree, because we're on the border of Ealing, and as a teacher you can go on the inner London wage, and it's significantly higher than outer London. We do have the benefit of being on the border of Fringe, which is just outside here, pretty much just across the road actually, if we go out of Uxbridge. So what I was looking at, we were looking at, in my school, we were looking at what schools do in best practice in terms of recruiting teachers, and there was a school in this borough, I'm not going to name them, but they've changed the way they provide fringe benefits to teachers. I think one was a relaxed working day on the Friday afternoon. I think the kids go home about an hour early, and teachers get the option to do some catch-up or that 1 hour extra to go home early. I mean, small things like that make a massive difference in this profession, because 99% of teachers are not in the job for the money. They're in it for the benefit of the kids, for the fulfilment, and those sorts of things. There's more of an observation is, do we have a best practice on what we can suggest schools to do? Maybe I know schools are their own entities nowadays, where they set their own recruitment policies, apart from the ones that are community schools. But do we have a best practice where we can say, right, as a borough, we can implement these policies in our schools where you could have PPA time from home? Small things like that will probably go a long way with retention and recruitment.
Thank you, Councillor. We do have a site earmarked for your first question, but as it stands, we haven't heard any updates from the DFE. We have been pressing them, so we don't know what to expect and when it comes to the free school. As far as teacher recruitment, it's a challenging one. I think there has been times where it has been more difficult. The feedback I hear from schools now is that that's not a struggle. The area that they do struggle a little bit more with is special needs teachers, so that can be a little bit harder. I think as it stands, I mean, we want to work with our schools to create supportive mechanisms for things like recruitment, but it's very much down to their local decisions. So things like PPA at home, I think many do that now. That's quite common practice. We'd need to be careful with things like the hour earlier finishing time, because of the hours that children need to do as part of their timetables and so on. But we'd certainly, I think it's something that we're looking to do longer term, is to work with our schools around some of those sort of strategies to support. Certain schools that I speak to might struggle a little bit with teaching assistant recruitment as well, whereas other schools don't have any challenges. So it's generally, the feedback I'm getting is that schools aren't finding it too difficult at the moment. One school I saw recently said they get loads of applications for teaching assistants, so it does vary. But I think that's something we'd like to develop further over time.
And I noticed that dreaded Easter time coming up with the deadline for notices, so I know a lot of head teachers are probably sitting there looking at their pigeonholes thinking, a bit nervous anyway. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Little.
Can I go to the bottom end of the scale, if I may put it that way, the very early years? Do we think we have enough capacity to provide early years for all the kids who want it? And will it be something that would still apply after the increase in hours that the government says it's going to provide?
So, as far as I understand, this sits with Claire Fry. But my understanding is that it's something that we do have sufficient places for currently, but we need to keep it under close monitoring, because it could change and that could become more challenging. As it stands, I believe that we are okay for places.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Councillor Sweeting.
It's just on the issue of unfilled capacity in our primaries. I know that we have to keep a very close eye on these projections because we all know that they can somehow sort of change round, so we need to actually express that to our cabinet, I think, on that. But there are schools that will have unfilled class spaces. Is it possible that we could have an audit done on that? Because as an ex-teacher myself, I know teachers always fill a space. I mean, if there's a space to be filled, they will fill it. But there may well be the possibility of linking what the council wants to do in a certain area, a certain aspect of improvement. And if there's a space in local schools that possibly can be used for that, that would be a really good way forward. So having an audit of the sort of that capacity, not saying that they're going to definitely use it, but just having that information that we could use if we needed to approach a school and say, we're thinking of doing X in this area, could you help with that particular classroom or set of classrooms? We've done this in the past, have we not, with Pinkwell, with the spaces there and Ruislip Gardens, but it would be good to have a full audit of this, surely.
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's a really good idea. I'm just trying to think of the logistics around it. We've had net capacity assessments done. I'm not sure if we've got all of those yet, but there was certainly a programme around the net capacity assessments. But it's quite difficult, without looking at each school in detail, to understand what capacity they need for the pupil numbers and therefore what is in excess. So we'll certainly look into it, but I'm just not sure how easy it would be to do without it being a big focus piece of work. What I would say is that we really encourage the teams to go out to schools a lot now. I think they have always been, but it's really important amongst all the different teams that they're out there. I'm also doing visits my plan is to visit every school. I'm halfway through so far, and try and pick up on where there's spaces. And we know of certain schools that have, in some cases, quite a lot of available capacity. But you are also right in that schools will always use the space creatively and make use of it. So we do regularly sort of have conversations about different opportunities that come up, whether it be something for one of our services or adult learning or whatever it might be that we could try and use some of the space with. So it's something we're continually trying to support with because it would support the school and services.
I was going to highlight adult learning because that's what, when we had the report on adult learning, that's what the officer did say.
We did explore that in detail, particularly around adult learning, but there's a very specific area that we need and it's difficult to necessarily match up the school and the space needed. But yes, we are always reviewing it.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions or comments on this agenda item, we'll bring it to a close. We need to provide comments to Cabinet, so we'll take that offline like we usually do. Okay, thank you. So we'll move on then to agenda item 6, which is the outcome of the consultation for the proposal to amalgamate Grange Park Infant and Nursery School and Grange Park Junior School. Is that you, Gary? Yes. So if we can just go straight to questions, if that's okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this agenda item? Did you have? Yeah, not really. Okay, so we need to...
Very well, Gary.
Again, on this agenda item, we are to provide comments to Cabinet, which we will take offline and do that. Oh, Councillor Sweeting, yes.
I mean, I know the schools pretty well when I was an officer. I mean, so it's in the same building. I think sometimes these amalgamations, when it's not in the same building, is not such an easy fit. But I know that there are some parents that are still concerned, let's put it that way, on this. But I think knowing the schools and the actual geography of the schools, I think it is a good fit. Thank you.
Oh yeah, Gary.
I mean, the feedback from the consultation, we had 87% of respondees were in support, and out of those people that responded, more than half were actually parents at the school. So again, the feedback we've had, the meeting we had with the school as well, the parents that attended, we all got very positive feedback. So we can only go, obviously, by what we know.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 7, which is the annual education standards report. Michael, to you. Again, we'll go straight to questions, if that's okay. Who would like to begin with questions? Councillor Sweeting, yes, go on.
Well, I mean, page 127, the Part 3 analysis on school performance, there are some concerns there, because, you know, each of the, when we compare ourselves to our statistical neighbours, you know, we have to admit that there are concerns with London Borough's statistical neighbours. And so the report states on page 127 that the gap between non-disadvantaged and disadvantaged remains significant within Hillingdon. So what progress has been made in bridging the gap? Because it seems that bridging the gap is the key to all of this. And we seem to have not been able to do that. So maybe the reasons why standards have not been improving the way that we would all wish is that bridging of the gap. So what are we doing to try to bridge the gap?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I mean, we've had the beginnings of this discussion in a previous meeting. Inside the report is the sharing of the education priorities and the education strategy, and we launched a programme in November this year, which is obviously not part of last year's standards, in response to this, as you may be aware, and we're working closely with the Education Endowment Foundation. Currently we've got about 85 to 90 of our schools that have committed to working with us on this, and we've already started termly meetings. So in a sense, the launch shared with schools very clearly the local picture. Also, the schools know their own picture, and we've started a conversation with them about what, you know, taking a step back, as I said to you previously, from COVID, what can we learn from what other boroughs, particularly across London, our statistical neighbours are doing? Are we doing the right things that are going to lead to the biggest impact? So if I give you an example about early years, you know, what was it, 51% of children who were disadvantaged achieved a good level of development, particularly around communication and language, but 30% of non-disadvantaged didn't achieve it either. So what we're trying to do is use the thrust on vulnerable groups, including those in pupil premium, but also on SEN register and white British, black Caribbean, and smaller groups like Gypsy, Roman Traveller, to try to drive that improvement on standards, which also will hopefully have an impact on the non-disadvantaged children that also aren't achieving outcomes that we would hope. So I completely agree with you, and that's the message we've been sharing with schools, and they're very keen to work with us on those. Luckily, we also have quite a number of schools, primary and secondary, that really do excellently, and we're finally getting collaboration from them. So the secondary meeting that took place, secondary post-16 this week, I think we had 22 out of 23 schools attend. There were 45 people signed up to attend the primary version, and we had a really big turnout for the early years, and the PVI setting. So we've got to keep the momentum going, but we're working with credible organisations as well who are bringing in the EEF research schools from places like Newham, which is the highest performing borough for that. So it's a mainstream school improvement thrust focused on our most vulnerable students. Because if we get it right for them, of course, it will impact everybody else.
Please don't think that I'm criticising in any way our schools and the teachers within them, because I'm not. I know from experience, I'm a governor of 2 schools, and I know the extreme lengths that our teachers go and the children that they're teaching go to try to improve matters. But it would seem that maybe other London boroughs are doing things a little bit differently that we could learn from, and it's good that you've shared that information with me. My second question was about some wording in one of the pages of the report. Page 174, paragraph 8 states that Hillingdon was generally above or in line with national and statistical benchmarks. But were we? We've only got to look at the graph in 3.3, page 173, and the other graph that shows otherwise. So let's be honest with us when we're reporting these things. You know, Hillingdon 64%, regional 68%, statistical neighbours 66%. So we were not in line. For lots of reasons we were not in line. But let's please be honest in our reports by saying that we are in line with our statistical neighbours and regional.
Sorry, Councillor, which page did you say that was?
Right, okay. It's page 174, paragraph 80. Right, and it says, key stage 1 and 2 outcomes in Hillingdon were above, generally above or in line with statistical benchmarks. And you've only got to look at the previous page, the graph, which is key stage 2 outcomes in Hillingdon. And there you have it, the graph on the left-hand side, which shows those percentages. And so we are not in line with those benchmarks. So why don't we say that we're not in line?
Apologies, maybe I was feeling a bit generous that moment. I apologise. I mean, the percentages are small, but again, if you translate that into numbers of pupils, I guess it could be, we have to count it like that. So I appreciate that. Maybe I made a mistake and I was judging it against the performance in phonics, but I apologise. I can rectify that for you.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, so, 64% for Hillingdon, regional 68%, statistical neighbour 66%. So that is a significant difference.
Yeah, I've no problem with that. I mean, that's the message that I've been sharing with our schools while saying there's lots of strength. This is a moment to take a step back and ask ourselves, are we doing the smart things, the right things and the high impact things? So it's smarter, not harder, isn't it?
Yeah, I just want to follow on from what Councillor Sweeting's just said, because looking at early years outcomes on page 170, there's a statement there which is a bit worrying, I guess, because it says Hillingdon children are underperforming against both national and London children in all areas of learning. There's been a noticeable drop in standards this year. And then obviously you've mentioned about the priorities to raise attainment to bring us back in line with national and London outcomes. But what does this really look like in practice? How exactly are we looking to achieve this?
Well, first of all, we're trying to engineer collaboration between our schools and settings, which has been sadly lacking for quite a long time. And we've been quite clear with them about that. The message from we've had a strategic group of 20 schools working with the EEF on 4 modules to explore the evidence for everything from our pupil premium strategies. They analysed those, and looking at the key characteristics, there will be a heavy focus on early years, but actually we're going to spread that across the piece. There'll be a heavy focus on language and communication, but that will look different across every phase of education, and we will work closely with not just schools that are doing really well in our own borough, but with other schools across London, and utilise the sort of strengths of the EEF research schools, and we're in close collaboration with them. So it's not a quick fix. Some of it might be a quick fix, and we might see, because some small increments will actually go quite a long way in the data. And that's the other thing, because when you're looking at percentages, you've really got to drill back and think, well, what numbers are we talking about? And I've put that in some of the part 2, I think, around the disadvantage gaps. We've produced a whole data dashboard that we're going to be sharing with schools specifically around our priorities. It's very visual, and they'll have one each. We're just sort of curating and cleansing the data for that. I do expect there to be increments over the years. I'll hang my hat on it. I don't mind saying it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smallwood.
Thank you, Chair. You stole my first question, so I'm going to actually lead on to something that Councillor Sweeting said. And I just wondered about this statistical neighbours thing. Say that quickly with your teeth in. Do we feel, how often is our statistical neighbours reviewed as to who our statistical neighbours are? And do we feel that maybe the benchmark that we are basing ourselves on has changed? We have seen a lot of children, we are a port borough, we've seen children arrive at our port. I'm not saying that that's an excuse, but I just want to understand, because Councillor Smith makes a really important point, but I just wondered if the playing field has changed, and whether actually there is a set of scenarios and circumstances that maybe mean that our statistical cohort neighbours is not a fair one to mark us against? I think that's where I'd like to start.
Well, I pay more attention to our statistical neighbours that are our neighbours in London. So, you know, Brent and Harrow. Milton Keynes, one of our statistical neighbours. It's easy for me to say. I used to work in Milton Keynes before COVID, and it's the kind of place where people go to live and work because there's lots of work. So the demographic of children isn't necessarily the same here. So I suppose what I'm really trying to say is my focus is really London, because London's so far ahead. And yeah, it's fine that we look at a range of different boroughs, but we've got so much resource on our doorstep, we've got so much evidence of what works, and so my conversation with schools and our conversation with schools is, let's look at what works and let's ask how much are we doing of it. So when you say, actually, yeah, we do some of that, how much, how consistently, you know, and let's strip back what we're doing and let's make it smart, and then we'll see the results. And of course there are wraparound issues as well. It's not just about teaching and learning. All the schools have flagged up attendance as one of the issues. So depending on which groups of pupils you're talking about, some of them aren't in school enough to actually achieve. And then, you know, if you look at children with a known social worker, of which we've got currently 1,000, the attendance rates of those children, primary and secondary, they vary, but they're not sufficiently high enough for those children to achieve in school. And 1,000 is a big figure out of our cohort. So not all of them are taking exams, and we're measuring these against those, you know, outcomes. But we have to be really hard and honest about what we can do, and we have to do some different things. And actually we need us all to be publicising that, the power of attendance, the benefits of attendance. But schools also need to make sure that when children want to walk into school, it's a place that they want to be in.
Chair, today I have the complete pleasure of stepping outside of my ward for a few minutes and going back to my old school of Northwood. And when I was at Northwood, and Abby may know about this, it was one of the worst performing schools in the borough, and now is one of the best performing schools in the borough. But what was very interesting was speaking to their new head, Mr. Shah, who I have to say was clearly doing a fantastic job. It was bumping into my old drama teacher who was there and catching up with her, and it made me think about tonight's questioning around, do we do some information around subjects? Because I remember when I was at Northwood, no one could blooming read or add up, but we were all brilliant at drama, right? Seriously, it was the best performing school in the borough at drama, but massively struggling to perform at things like science, maths, English. And I'd be interested to actually get some information for the future to start to understand how Hillingdon pupils are performing in a variety of subjects, but also how SEND children are performing in a variety of subjects. Is there particular subjects they're doing well in? Is there a particular parts of the borough or schools that are doing particularly amazing things in particular subjects, so that we can go on to what I think Michael was saying with a lot of collaboration and learning. So I was just wondering, if it's not going to be too much work for officers, can we drill in, especially at the secondary level, this to get some information on the subjects, not just English and maths, which are super important, but some of the other subjects about how Hillingdon pupils are performing. Sorry to sort of go on a little bit there, Chair, but it just, going back today, kind of reminded me of, you know, my roots and being a bit of a drama queen. I've always enjoyed that subject, but I do think they can make a massive difference in people's lives, and it'd be interesting to see how our schools are performing in different subjects, not just focusing on English and maths.
All that data is available. I could have included it in here if you wanted me to. It's just that just for length, but I agree. I think we need to revamp the standards report partly as well, and maybe take some things out under your recommendations of what you found useful and represent it. But all of that data is available. We can even show you a ranking of schools about different indicators if you want. And what you won't get in that is a ranking then compared to statistical neighbours and regional. You get a national picture so, you know, it's a question of just you tell us which data you'd like to see, but we can drill down to subjects at Key Stage 4 and A-level by particular groups. All of those things are possible. It's just there's more data to look at, but as long as it's visually pleasing, it's easy to read.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. What I would suggest, Councillor Smallwood, is you just pop that in an email to myself and Ryan, and we'll have a look at, you know.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mr. Little.
Thank you. In, I think it's page 135, you talk about schools on your at-risk register. and I noticed that there were 7 of secondary schools that seem to fall into that category. That's about 40% of our secondary schools, which seems really quite high. Is that something we should be worrying about, or is it something you're being excessively cautious about?
Depends which school you're talking about, I think. If it pleases you, Mr. Little, I can tell you that there are no longer 7 secondary schools on our at-risk register. As you know yourself, schools that were due an Ofsted where they'd had a previous partially negative Ofsted that wasn't graded, have now had Ofsteds and have passed them with flying colours, which doesn't mean there isn't lots of work for them to be doing. I was in one of them yesterday. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about. And, you know, we also put schools on the risk register because it allows us to track them and ensure that with the limited education advisor resource we have, we deploy directly to them in advance to make sure that, you know, school improvement is something that happens in a week. You know, it's about, you know, proper support and clarity. It's not just on the school. Sometimes you have to show them the way. It's not just about having meetings. So that's why some schools are on the at-risk register. A couple of schools are cautiously on the at-risk register for primary, and there are a couple of academy schools that have been on the at-risk register for a while. I asked the DFE, for example, what they're going to do about it, and they said, well, can you help us? And so it's an interesting one, that, and that's exactly what we're doing. So, you know, it's an ongoing conversation, really. I mean, with the maintained schools and our maintained special school, it's easy to provide support, but I can't qualify the quality of support that might take place at some of our other schools, but we do reach out to those schools and we do have conversations with them, and with some of the hard to not crack trusts, they've come round to us in some ways, and we are working. I can see progress. But the risk register is also about, you know, caution. It's also about thinking we need to focus on these schools. So there will be less schools on that register the next time you see it.
Councillor Batt.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that you know, to help increase and drive performance, the 5-year priorities are quite important from the report. So on page 126, I just wanted to ask I've got 2 questions on this, but how are the sort of identified 5-year priorities being communicated to schools and stakeholders for effective implementation? And are there sort of measurable milestones in place to assess the progress of those 5-year priorities?
That's a very good question, thank you. They've been shared with all head teachers. I mean, to be honest with you, before we published the draft of the education strategy, we were talking with schools about the data that was actually included in there, which was from a year previously. We've been talking to schools about that regularly, all the strategic partnership boards and head teacher termlies. We've done it with governors and the ones that attend the training that we've put on, which is, it's not everybody, but you know, the message is going around. We need to continue doing that. And yes, you're absolutely right. The data team are creating a data dashboard, and we need to rigorously track, particularly priority 3. Which is ambitious, but it should be. I think Julie Kelly says she doesn't like ambitions less than 100%, so I'll go with Julie Kelly on that one. But yeah, we will be tracking it, and so what we will attempt to show you in the next standards report is something very specifically aligned to those priorities.
That's great, thanks. I had a second question for my Chair. The second question was around disadvantage on underperforming groups. I was wondering what culturally specific interventions are kind of considered to address the underachievements of, I think it was White, British, Black, Caribbean, Gypsy, Roma and Traveller peoples. And I'm also wondering how the Council's collaborating with schools to ensure that the pupil premium funding is properly utilised to narrow the achievement gap?
Yeah, thank you. Good question again. I mean, first of all, you've got to shine a torch on it and make people aware that this continues to be an issue. And then you've got to give them the opportunity to go back and interrogate their data, and as we know, data only poses questions. So the stage we're at the moment is getting some people to dig deeper into their data. I know from experience that, for example, with Black Caribbean underachievement across the country over the last 25 years, there were other features at play, including a higher level of exclusion, so we are comparing it with our exclusions data and other things like that. Probably the focus at the moment is on quality first teaching in the mainstream classroom, which rather than wraparound interventions, which has been a focus. So as part of the Achievement for All programme, so moving into this academic year, schools will be invited to take part in a session with the East London Research School of the EEF on writing a high impact pupil premium strategy that turns into delivery and impact. So we're providing opportunities to review a whole range of different things. I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's a bit of a combination between Councillor Batt and Councillor Smallwood's two questions. I think one, Councillor Small was asking for metrics on subjects by school and performance. I was wondering, would it be possible to get subject offers that our schools do in the borough and maybe compare it to a statistical neighbour? So it kind of looks at what we're actually offering, what products we're offering as a borough to students, so they don't have to go elsewhere to maybe do certain courses, and it's more of a focus on key stage 4 and 5, probably more towards 5, and then linking it to Councillor Batt's question about underachievement. Sometimes students don't have access to certain courses they'll do well in, so they kind of get stuck with maybe doing A-levels instead of doing a B-Tech or a level 2 or a level 3 course. So would it be possible to get that metric, what we offer as a borough, courses, different subjects, different topics, and compare it to a statistical neighbour maybe?
I think we can. We have to factor in that Uxbridge College, which is obviously part of Harrow, Richmond Uxbridge College, has a massive offer. I mean, last year the other factor that we need to consider around Uxbridge College is that all their spaces are full because they're putting on level 1 courses, so our students that didn't achieve level 2 courses are going back to do level 1 courses at the college. They have enough evidence to show that if you start on a level 1 course at post-16, you often get to level 3, but it takes a bit of time. They were the number 1 FE college in the country for GCSE English retake, and they were 11th in mathematics last year. And so, you know, I'm confident that there's a huge range of courses available. I think the challenge is for schools and their post-16 offer. So some of them have stuck very clearly to A-levels, and there's obviously a big demand for A-levels, and of course, absolutely. Some of the schools anecdotally have told me, and it's anecdotally, that what they notice, of course, at the lower end of their sort of cohort at the end of year 11, those students leave and often go to the college. But actually, their more able students are also choosing to go elsewhere because the kinds of courses they want to do aren't available in a school. And that's a real challenge, I think. And there may be logistical barriers for that, you know, like T-levels and all that kind of stuff. But those big FE providers can provide a much broader range of offers. We have a very good relationship with Uxbridge College, and we're working closely with them, and we are working closely with them to work with the schools as well to be more collaborative, and that's been something that's been going on for 2 years. So we're constantly revising that. But, you know, for a young person, they have lots of choices, don't they? They can go across to Harrow, they can go to Ealing, you know. So there's lots and lots of them. Obviously, they're all part of the same college chain, but I do understand what you mean, and we have to keep on top of it all the time. So we do produce a post-16 prospectus, and we get quite a lot of hits off it. All of the post-16 providers, including the schools, put their, you know, what their offer is in there. So does the college, so do training providers. the first half of the brochure actually helps a Year 11 student understand their pathway through Year 11 in terms of open evenings, what's out there available to you, what are vocational pathways, what are academic pathways, all the way up to level 7. More than happy to share a copy of that with you. Probably see what the offer is in many respects in there. It's going to go mobile for the next academic year because obviously students are more likely to look at it on their phone, but we send it to parents, we advertise it in places outside of schools. So we will, I think we can try to do that. I don't know what, we can maybe reach out to one of our neighbouring boroughs and see how willing they are to map that out, or whether they've got something. So most places don't have a post-16 prospectus like ours. It's probably the best one in London. Yeah.
Sorry, Michael, is that available online on our website? Or?
It's available on Leap. The link to it is available in a number of places, but we can put it anywhere you would like it, really. Would you like us to send you a link to it so you can see it?
Yes, please. Yeah.
There you go. That's very impressive, sir.
It works.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Little.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about children missing in education. Two things. One is about the speed of response. I mean, how quickly do we think we identify children missing in education and do something about it? And secondly, what sort of characteristics do they share, and do they link to other achievement type characteristics?
Well, again, that's a very good question. Children missing from education is a sort of, has a particular category around it. Missing from education for 10 days, reported to the local authority, one school day if you're a looked after child. But what we've had since COVID, as you're probably aware, is we've got other factors which are present in things like keeping children safe in education. So children absent from education maybe 1 day a week. Children with unexplainable absences that now should be referred to children's social care as well by schools because they're unexplained. So there are different types of, if you're talking about the standard statutory missing from education one, our attendance teams work with schools on that, but I would have to go back and ask them more closely about the characteristics that they show, because I couldn't really hand on heart tell you at this time if it's been broken down that specifically. I mean, it's been all we know is that, of course, sporadic attendance has been a problem, although overall attendance has actually improved in the last year, as there's been a focus on it. So we need to keep that momentum going, but I can go back and get some more specific information for you about that if you'd like, because that part falls under one of the other services which may be able to give you a more specific breakdown of the data that's on here.
I think that would probably be a good idea, as it links with some of the other things we've been doing.
Yeah.
I've got a question about something completely different. It was about the elective home education. I noticed from the charts that you included in the report that about half the parents have not given you the information as to the reasons why they went for the elective home education. Are we making greater efforts to try and get that information, to try and identify their more consistent problems, is the first question. The second one is, do we look at the attainments and progress of the children who've been home educated, and is there a mechanism by which that information is shared with us?
Again, it's a very good question. are lots of different reasons why people choose elective home education, as we know, and the law gives them the right to do so. I mean, in terms of just practical mechanisms, if a child was in a school and a family decided to electively home educate, the school should conduct an interview with them, and the documentation we've provided for the school asks very specifically to cite a reason why they might want to do that, and that has to be sent to us, so our elected home education officers would be able to collate that. Where there's a gap in that information, one of the challenges I think that they find as we perform our minimum statutory duties in terms of reaching out to families to ensure that people are getting an education which is suitable for them, is some are willing to share that information with us, and some are, it's very minimal, and some of the families that make an active choice about elective home education are the ones that really don't want to share. What we're trying to ensure, of course, is that in the increase of those in elective home education, that we want to ensure that people aren't elective home education because they're effectively forced to, which is illegal. That schools aren't saying, we recommend that you electively home educate your child or we'll exclude them. Or that people just think the offer that they've got isn't very nice and they'd prefer to be at home. So it's a challenging area because the legislation doesn't support us currently, and that's been an ongoing problem that you're probably aware of over a long period of time. The government has said it will bring in a register, and with a few more obligations on the parts of parents, that would be really helpful, but we are still playing a sort of catch-up game, and we are relying heavily on the willingness of parents to share that with us. And what's interesting is, while some parents do, the parents whose children, go to Oxford at 14 don't want to share it either. And that's the challenge we've got. So it's really a mixed bag, and 650 children, we're asking questions, we want to know what's going on, and I don't think we do track the attainment of them, because again it would rely on people to share that with us, that it's not a centrally stored pot. We might be able to get it, we can't get it from school census data, can we, because they're not on school roll. So legally, theoretically, they've made an active choice to educate their children at home. It's continuing to be a gap area.
Thank you, Mr. Little. That was my question too, actually, so thank you for that. But I just want to follow up on that, because where does safeguarding come into this?
This is one of the concerns raised by many people over the years. I remember when I first started working in this borough and I was looking at elective home education. That was during COVID, it was a lockdown, and I was tracking those children that were on child protection or child in need plans, and I was just looking at the dates of when their professionals meetings were meant to be and whether those had actually happened or not, because the problem, of course, is that those children become invisible. So some of them do have a known social worker, or their parents have a known social worker because of their victims of domestic abuse. So there is somebody going in there, but not necessarily going in there all the time with an education lens, and it's a worry, because some people use elective home education to hide possible abuse. And it's really difficult, because that's the benefit of being in a school or a setting. You become visible to lots of professionals. So we rely heavily on communication, but, it's a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor Sweeting.
Page 139, regarding the Fair Access Panel, this is still an issue in respect to the South and secondary move-ins, due to no spare capacity in local schools, and the fact that majority of schools in that area are academies and are in charge of their own admissions. So we have here 82 children that were out of school as there were no school within a reasonable distance from home. Now, how many of those were offered schools, really, that were still not going to be within a reasonable distance from home? Because I have got several of my residents whose children are spending a long time travelling to these unfilled places that are predominantly in the north of the borough. So that's still an issue, is it not? So how many are going long distances?
I'm sure we could provide that information. We'd have to quantify what long distances meant, wouldn't we? Because I know that the admissions team do hold that data. They endeavour to work with academies as well as maintain schools to ensure that children get a school place and work with the in-year fair access panel. And I regularly have meetings with the head of admissions with a head teacher for school about individual students if we feel that's necessary, just to make sure that we're following up with every individual child. And actually, if a parent was to cite that actually the distance from school was a barrier, they would look proactively at finding a closer school. As you can see, there's still work to do in terms of that, but they do rigorously monitor every single individual child. They let myself know or other people in the team that they think can help to bear an influence, and we do work closely with academies, even if sometimes it's a bit challenging. They do set their own admissions things, but what we can do is hold them to account about what they've written in their own admissions policies and whether they're following it equitably or not.
But my comment is there's still going to be an issue with this, even with falling roles, because the move-ins are generally in a certain part of the borough, and extra capacity in housing is going to be in a certain part of the borough. So this is an issue.
I think that's a fair point, but we're just working very hard with schools to try to accommodate that, and that's the only answer I can currently give you, really.
Just following on from Councillor Sweeting's point on that actual box there, the green table, I just wanted to understand where it says children for whom a place has not been sought due to exceptional circumstances. I mean, obviously without giving too much away, but what does that actually mean?
I had a meeting with the head teacher of a school that's been named today about a student in their school whose mental health breakdown has led to hospital admissions, who CAMS have identified as not fit for school at this time, whose parent wants them to go to school, but they're all suffering from the bereavement of their parent. And, you know, these are individual cases, but there have been a number of things like that, and other kinds of things which we've seen, you know, when we talk about emotionally based school non-attendance, specifically children are saying they feel suicidal about the idea of going to school. And again, sometimes CAMS have recommended that for a period of time until things improve that they shouldn't actually attend.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments, members? No? Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of you, actually, for joining us this evening. I think also on this agenda item we need to provide comments, so again we will take that offline and do that. So you are free to leave if you'd like to. Abby, it's up to you if you'd like to stay for agenda item 9, which is going to be the persistent absenteeism review, but I know we talked about it offline, but entirely your choice. If you have any further comments or have you had a chance to look at the document that might have been sent? Was it sent to Abby? Did you? Okay. All right. I tell you what, we'll pick it up again offline. You know. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you. Okay. So agenda item 8, we said the item has been withdrawn, the place to be item. So hopefully we can pick that up at another future meeting. So we go to agenda item 9, which is the persistent absenteeism review. So just to explain to Select Committee that on the 7th of March, Councillor Sweeting and myself met with Abby, Catherine, Angelini to discuss the draft recommendation. So that was the original document that was circulated by Ryan. There has been an updated version that was circulated more recently, which is just a shorter, I think about 8 or 9 recommendations on there, and that hopefully reflects the points that were discussed in that meeting with Abby and Catherine. So I think at this point now we're at the stage of looking at those as almost like a final draft, and we want to kind of move forward and make those recommendations final. So it would be really good if there are any questions or comments on anything that we can discuss it now, and then we can perhaps pick this up again offline, just to make sure the officers have had a closer look and have had a chance to comment on that, to make sure we've captured it all accurately on their behalf. Does anyone at this stage have anything to comment on? Miss Little.
One of the things, excuse me, I had a cold last week, and one of the things that struck me, particularly at the witness session we had with the parents, was that they made a lot of comments along the lines of, what I'm doing keeping them off is much more educational than them going to school. And because school is, if not quite compulsory, the next best thing, there is no advocate for the benefits of education. So the first set of recommendations, the Theme 1 recommendations, talk about the informing people of the impact of absence in terms of degrees of achievement, if I may put it that way. You don't get as good a GCSE, you don't get as good an A-level if you're not there. But there's nobody actually saying education is a really good thing because, and that the only potential advocate in that way is probably the authority. And that ought to be a role we suggest the authority take up.
Yeah, so I think you make a really valid point, because maybe the conversation should be, it's positive messaging rather than something quite negative. And I think that first statement there is trying to capture that whole idea of collaborative working. So it's officers, so council officers working with schools, with nurseries, early years, and continue that good work to reinforce a positive messaging around, what you can achieve by going to school. Not only just in terms of kind of your educational achievements, but also socially as well. There's so much to gain with that interaction. Does that kind of help, I think? Or do you think that the wording needs to be changed around it, perhaps?
Well, I think it needs to be strengthened to bring that out a bit more explicitly.
Okay. Sorry.
Rid of the mic again.
Yes.
But it ought to be more explicit that there's a value in education.
Sure. Okay, understood.
And the authority should be at least helping to put that value over, as well as the schools. I mean, the schools will tend to sell themselves as being the right choice amongst many.
Yes. Okay.
But at different stages, at the primary, the value of learning to read is different from when you're at secondary, and you're more thinking about career and potential post-16 education. But
yes, okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? Councillor Sweeting?
My extra is sort of linked to that, and that's actually having almost like a poster campaign and putting it putting this issue of school is good basically, and the benefits of it, and getting that message across as early as possible. So posters in libraries and in council venues, etc. Posters that schools can put up on their notice boards as well. I do think time and time again we had particularly from the schools, it's almost need to get to the parents as early as possible, and that in the nicest possible way, to crack the parents will mean cracking absenteeism. So getting there, and I think Mr. Little is right by saying that we need to be a bit more proactive in that. This is, we are a local education authority, we are a local council, and so we value education, and we are showing that message to our residents in whatever way we can, in Hillingdon people, in any literature that comes from us.
Okay, anyone else? Mr. Little?
I'm not sure in terms of a wording to go with this one, but one of the problems that exists is getting children the right sort of help, whether it be mental health help or whether it be special needs help. I mean, those two categories of child with those disabilities are among those who are the worst in terms of absence. But we're not saying in this set of recommendations anything that draws attention of the appropriate officers at CAMS or at the council of the necessity for meeting deadlines, for doing this as fast as is practical. Each bureaucratic delay that comes into the system probably means a child with extra absence that they didn't need to have had.
Yeah, okay, so I guess for the statement around theme 2, mental health and wellbeing, we need to have something a bit stronger, I guess, that there for wording. Okay, all right, that's a good point. Councillor Batt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree a lot with what Councillor Sweeting and Mr. Little has said. I think that when we interviewed the witnesses or the actual children themselves, there was a mention of sort of gang culture and gang violence as well, and I don't think that's been touched on so much here. And I think I agree with Councillor Sweeting in terms of the importance of parents, but I think it's also incumbent on schools or even external stakeholders to hold sort of courses and training on how to manage that. And it is a difficult thing to manage, that kind of creating that bad culture, if you like. Yeah, and I absolutely agree with Mr. Little on all the other points about depression and mental health was a big part of when we interviewed the students, and again, it's also how parents haven't been able to deal with that. But also, one thing that came out from interviewing the students was it's quite a common theme across from all of them was the fact that the schools weren't able to help or identify that at an early stage. They felt sort of neglected, and maybe it's good to kind of review the internal policies and processes of what schools are currently doing at the moment to identify those issues at the earliest stage.
Okay, Councillor Sweeting?
Maybe we could make mention that there's government funding for mental health training. It was mentioned in one of the reports that was forthcoming. So how is this actually appearing, and is that going to be strengthened anyway? So and there was talk about having a mental health mentor in every school, so I think that's part of it. Also, there was an issue right at the very beginning saying absenteeism and attendance should be a whole council message. It should, and so it would be good to know, really, that to say that we acknowledge that this is not just a particular department or sets of departments, but this is something that all of us in this council need to be considering, and all departments as well. I don't know whether it's also possible to see whether any other LEAs have got a magic bullet. I know that we've had that information that came from them. And also I'm very worried that we asked our schools to come up with all of their answers, if you like, all their suggestions, and that was a big wad of information. I think we do need to go back and see what they have said to us to see whether we can strengthen any of these recommendations to show that we are listening to our schools. Because one of the comments was if we don't have any of this happening, we would like it to be shown to be happening. So I think we do need to go back particularly to what our schools have been telling us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smallwood?
Yeah, just maybe a final point, Chair. Maybe point 4 covers it in the recommendations. I'm not sure, but just around the sharing of good practice amongst different educational settings and how, if someone, I think, Councillor Sweeting has just described, someone's got the golden bullet, that they share a little bit of the gold around to other schools. But I think it was interesting when we had the admissions people come in around. There's clearly do the admissions people talk to each other? So maybe something, and now maybe point 4 covers it. I don't know, but maybe there's a little bit there. But I'm sure you can take it offline with the Labour lead. And
yeah, it's certainly point 4, but more point 5 because they have attendance cluster groups. And actually, Catherine, although she wasn't able to join us this evening for this meeting, has kindly provided the recent update of all the work that's been ongoing. So I know there's lots of work since we started this review. There's so much going on, and actually they've made lots of positive progress in this area, which is fantastic. So yes, okay, so really good to get everyone's kind of thoughts and feedback on it. Councillor Sweeting.
Creating a Hillingdon Attendance Award initiative, etc. We know that getting children as early as possible is important on this. So maybe this could be cascaded down in a way to our nurseries and early years. I mean, even if it means a little sticky badge at the end of the school, of the nursery week, and looking at those nursery children that were able to attend on every day and making a bit of an issue on that, because if we start at that stage, it's more likely to extend when they arrive at statutory school time.
Yes, absolutely. Councillor Smallwood?
Chair, as a former teacher, I hesitate to disagree with Councillor Sweeting, but it's interesting, we were discussing this at a school governing body where I'm at an infant school, and often the attendance of the younger years, I think we heard that, is actually reflective of the parents. So I think one of my concerns with that is actually we're rewarding the children for the parents' behaviour rather than necessarily the young person. I think when they get into secondary education, Councillor Sweeting, I would agree with you 112%. But my concern when they're younger is they're not necessarily, some are, but they're not necessarily in control of the good or bad behaviour of being on time, being absent from a first lesson. It's often in the parents' hands. And it's a lovely idea, but my concern is I don't want to I don't want to reward children because their parents did them well and then not reward ones because their parents didn't do them well. So I just on that one, I don't want to disagree, and I'm genuinely meaning that from a heartfelt place on this occasion, but I'm just concerned about that one being as part of our review. Yeah, older years, yes. Younger years, no.
Yeah, and it goes back to parents valuing education as well, so... okay, fine. So what we'll do is we'll bring this agenda item to a close. We're going to take it, make sure the officers have had a chance to review this document and give their input. And we will, I think the plan is to look to finalise for next meeting. That would be the ideal plan, I think. Ryan, is that any comments on that?
It might be a bit soon.
Oh, do you think so?
Final.
Okay. Oh. Okay, but in terms of finalising the recommendations? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, so if we have that aim in mind that we'll try to finalise these recommendations by the next meeting, and then the report will follow perhaps after that. So, okay. Right, so let's move then to agenda item 10, which is forward plan. Any comments or anything on the... Yeah, okay. Item 11, which is the work programme. Any questions, comments on that one? Councillor Sweeting?
I think we've got something on update on school admissions. When we have that, could we have the map showing the Year 7 placements, which I mentioned earlier? And it would also be very good to have the audit of our secondaries. And that used to show, we've had it in the past, it used to show those schools that have got unfilled places. So it was a list of schools, etc. And also, I know that other select committees are looking at budgets very, very closely. And I see that, I think we've got it on our list as well. What we didn't have when we were looking at the budget, we didn't have an officer that was explaining to us how these savings were going to be made within our area, and I don't know whether that will be possible.
It is to my understanding that we will have a corporate director attending next meeting, Julie Kelly, so she'll be able to provide specific answers to questions that we may have in this area. Councillor Smallwood.
Just to add to that, and I said this at the Resident Services Select Committee, so I'll say it again here. I think it is important that when we're discussing financial options that it is the corporate director that is here to be held accountable, if not Mr Ennis, as the Director of Finance. They are the two people that I expect, and I said this on the other Select Committee, to be here. They're responsible for delivering it, and I want to be able to question them. Obviously, things happen, but in where possible, I think we should expect them to be here on the finance items. And even if we do that first, because they're going to have to come to quite a few potentially, even if we do that first as a courtesy, I think it's important they come.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Any other questions or comments before we bring this meeting to a close? Fabulous. Okay, great. So thank you very much, everyone. And so our next meeting is on the 15th of April. Thank you for your contributions today, and have a good evening.